Hi everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoy our shows, please like our videos and subscribe to our channel. And you can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 20th of October 2019, and our guest today is the Executive Director of the Paradigm Research Group. He's a lecturer, political activist and lobbyist in regards to the UFO truth embargo and government classified secrets about UFO and alien existence. Stephen Bassett. Good evening from Copenhagen, Denmark, and good afternoon to you, Stephen Bassett, joining us from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We are delighted to have you on the show, and thank you very much for being with us.
It's very nice to be with you. I have been to Sweden. I've lectured there. I love the country and look forward to coming back one day.
And I hope you'll come to Denmark, because that is actually where we are.
Yeah, Denmark, same thing. Just ditto on that. Denmark, I spoke in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway, all in a single tour.
Great.
And well, let me tell you, they know how to live in those countries. There's a lot to be learned from them. So I look forward to getting back to all of them.
Would it be correct to claim that when the 9/11 attacks on September the 11th, 2001 occurred and changed the course of history, that it put a stop to the possibility of UFO disclosure and the Disclosure Project initiated by Dr. Stephen Greer?
That's true. The Disclosure Project, Dr. Greer entered the field in late 1980s, started doing CE5 work, attracted some attention from the government. They started interacting with him. He had some insider connections, some meetings, and eventually set up the Disclosure Project, which led ultimately to, I think, his most important event that era, which was the May 9th, 2001 press conference, which was held in the building where I'm at right now. My office is in the National Press Building. So it was held up in the main ballroom of the National Press Club upstairs. It was well attended, a lot of media there. He had publicists in New York, had done a good job. It's where I met Sarah McClendon. I was sitting at her table, the legendary White House correspondent. I'm sorry, let me back that up. I actually met her sooner, but she was attending the 2001 event.
All right.
18 witnesses, I think, testified. Each one said that they would give the same testimony in front of Congress under oath. He had filmed 150 hours of witness testimony in general, which had been condensed into a greatest hits DVD or VHS, I think, and he handed some of those out. I got one. And I handed it to a friend of mine who took it straight to Ted Koppel. ABC contacted us that night and said they'd like to interview some of these witnesses. They asked for the ones that would be appropriate. I passed that on to Greer, and that probably got going. There was probably some development there to interview those witnesses. We were excited, but 4 months later, it was over, and the movement was stopped cold. It was very depressing, very upsetting. I developed a serious, I guess you could say, gastrointestinal problem, which no one could find out what it was. It was all pure stress. Greer was upset and angry. It was tough. History does this. If you're involved in a movement, an activist movement, that is at high level and is going to last for a good time, long time, history is going to intervene on you.
Do you think there was actually a very good possibility that we would have seen or had UFO disclosure at that time?
No, I can't say that. George Bush was president, and I don't think he was inclined in that direction. I think that he was not particularly, I don't think he was given a briefing on the subject. There was a lot of unknowns. Most of his gravitas came from his father, George H.W. Bush, who almost certainly was completely briefed on the E.T. issue.
He was the one really in the know, right?
Yes. But whether he told his son anything, we don't know. I don't think he did. In fact, I think that George H.W. Bush was slated to be the disclosure president in his second term. The Cold War was over, and there was a good basis to say now's the time to get this out. And the military intelligence complex had the perfect president for this. Someone that they trusted completely, that they knew would represent their interests and concerns. It was ideal, and of course it would have brought a huge political legacy to Bush and the Republican Party and so forth.
But do you think it actually will ever happen, and that it would have ever happened at that time?
George H.W. Bush, the Cold War ended in his first term, but he had a war in Iraq he was dealing with, but a very high approval rating. And I think it's not inconceivable that they were thinking, okay, he's going to win his second term, and given he's the president and given his resume, we'll disclose under George H.W. Bush. But he lost. He lost in a very interesting election. It's not even clear why. He just collapsed at the end, but he did. He went from an 80% approval rating to losing to a relatively obscure governor from Arkansas. So that was an instance in which history intervened, I think. And that was probably a stronger situation than we had in 2001. Now, in 2001, the situation was interesting because the Clintons were tied into the E.T. issue. They were brought into it by Lawrence Rockefeller. Of course, that's the Rockefeller Initiative, which a lot of people are learning about. Of course, we were promoting it, Cam and myself, to the media for years, starting in 2001, because we had all the documents confirming it. So the Clintons were really collected the ET issue, but he was stonewalled. They wouldn't tell him anything, and he was under constant attack. And then he dropped. Then that initiative ended in '96, going into that election. So now he was going to be the lame duck president, meaning second term, lame duck, nothing to lose, and he could have very well decided to get tough on this matter, revisit it, and force the DOD to his will. The Roswell anniversary was coming up in July of '97, which would have been 4 months into his second term. There was a lot happening, but they came under attack right away. But once he got in his second term, they really came after him. I think partially to keep him quiet, partially to keep him under control. And so they came at him with a new scandal, which he offered them. I mean, President Clinton is a tragedy in the sense that he simply could not control his impulses. And he handed his enemies a lot of material. He wanted to be JFK, but unfortunately it was a different time. So he comes under impeachment process. So he was kind of shut out. But Gore was going to win the next election. And Gore was in the White House and knew about the Rockefeller Initiative, knew that the Clintons had been stonewalled. But unlike Bill Clinton, he had a pretty good reputation with the DOD, with the Air Force and so forth. He had served on key committees. He was an expert on arms limitations, pretty smart guy. He was not Bill Clinton, but he was in fact a very close vice president to Clinton. And there's a possibility that if Gore had won, they might have moved forward and pushed it, because that way the Democrats would have gotten that political legacy.
But Gore went on to push the climate change agenda instead. But don't you think it's speculation or wishful thinking to imagine that any president, whether Republican or Democrat, would ever reveal and disclose the secrets about UFO and alien existence?
No, it's not only not wishful thinking, it's absolutely inevitable. You can count on it. Just put your money down that we will get a acknowledgement from a U.S. president, either as the first pronouncement or following behind 2 or 3 other heads of state who have gone forward and told the people the truth about this. It's inevitable.
But how will it change the world if the public and the world's population is actually told about this? Wouldn't it change everything, and the oil industry and coal and, well, everything?
It's going to change a lot of things. So what, right? Nuclear energy changed a lot of things. The combustion engine changed a lot of things. The iPhone changed a lot of things. Being a human in the modern era is going through change after change. And this will just be one more change. And the only reason that people somehow view this as, oh, we can't handle this and everything else, is the government has been pumping that propaganda into their head since the 1940s, feeding them a bunch of nonsense, misinformation, disinformation, and doing everything they could to maintain this truth embargo. And I get it. So I don't blame the people that have these misconceptions. I blame the government because they embargoed this issue.
But the whole financial structure as we know it will fall apart, right? And I don't think the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds or anybody else on that level will benefit from that or enjoy that, would they?
Well, first of all, the Rothschilds and the Vanderbilts or whoever you mentioned don't control the world.
Oh.
They're just very powerful people. They have a lot of money. There's a lot of people with a lot of money. The richest man in the world is a basic guy who started an online book company, and he's worth 110 billion, I think, even after giving 30, 40 billion to his wife. And as far as how the ultra wealthy might be affected, I can assure you that whatever impact short term it has on their reality, they will still be ultra wealthy. Years into the post-disclosure world, they will still be ultra wealthy.
Especially if you own most of everything, then you will still continue to be wealthy.
Well, again, these are statements. There are people that own a lot of stuff. There's a lot of rich people in the world. I don't subscribe to these overarching uber power figures, cabals and the Rothschilds and all this other stuff. I don't buy into it.
Why not? Isn't that pretty obvious?
Because it isn't supported. There isn't the evidence for it. What it is internet memes they're coming from people that are trying to understand the world that they're in and how difficult it is and why there's problems. And it's rather than try to understand the vast spectrum of these problems, which would require multiple PhDs, they ascribe it to some single point source, whether it's the Illuminati or what's the other thing they're now being, a deep state and what have you. And this doesn't reflect an understanding. It reflects an emotional frustration. And I get that. Basic people only can know so much. I appreciate that, but I can't operate in that realm.
Yeah, but isn't there much more evidence for the Illuminati structure and the New World Order structure than there is for UFO existence or alien existence and the alien presence on planet Earth?
No, not at all. The evidence for the extraterrestrial presence is massive. 70 years on, it would fill rooms, right? The evidence for the Illuminati, well, it's in some books by Dan Brown, and it's turned up in a couple of interesting books, which I've actually seen.
Well, the Illuminati is a fact. It was formed in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt.
Oh, something was formed. Yeah, no, I'm not saying there wasn't an Illuminati. I'm saying that the evidence that there is still a, quote, highly functioning Illuminati with massive influence over the course of nations and people, no, there isn't much evidence for that. And the evidence for the ET issue is massive.
You refer to yourself as a political activist, and you've certainly been very active in advocating UFO disclosure and the existence of extraterrestrial alien life, not only on planet Earth, but all over the universe. But in order to be a political activist, one must surely be a believer of the political system as we know it. But how can a politically informed truth seeker not be aware of the New World Order agenda behind all party lines, supposedly trying to create a one world government?
I am aware of the New World Order, and I'm aware of the one world government idea. I'm aware of the meme. I'm aware of the fact it's out there. I've seen plenty of posts on it. I've listened to various people describe it.
Presidents and prime ministers also.
Intellectually, I'm not finding it convincing. I'm not saying that it isn't playing a role in how people deal with the world, but this need to simplify the way the world works and how power is conducted and so forth is an understandable fact when you've got 6.8 billion people here, something like that. Most of them they'll have very little control over their lives. It's very hard to get through life. There's all kinds of terrible things happen, all kinds of powerful forces that work on them and can control you. And so you just want to somehow say, look, I don't know what's going on, but there's a new world order, right? But when if you actually try to flesh it out, if you try to get information on it, you end up on obscure websites or self-published books. And so it's just not substantive enough. There are multiple power centers all over the world. There are who knows how many, hundreds of them.
But it's compartmentalized pyramid structure, right? On a need-to-know basis.
I don't know about a pyramid structure. Pyramid structure has some use. In a way, there's always a kind of a pyramid associated with large-scale enterprises, but there are all kinds of power centers around the world. Banking groups here, banking groups there, individual wealthy families, plus major corporations and so forth. And they're not in some completely orchestrated process. In fact, they're competing with each other in a lot of cases, fighting over resources, fighting over our attention, not necessarily working together.
But aren't they just fighting on the lower levels, like what we see in the media and what we're supposed to believe or led to believe? And that really, when you're up there in the structure and on the higher level, then that is when it's really compartmentalized and only where the few control the many.
I'm trying to say that the many control the many. But it's not a democracy up there, admittedly. When a group of bankers in New York get together to talk about how things ought to go in the financial markets, it's not a democracy. These are power people. I'm simply saying that there's a lot of that happening in different sectors in different ways. And unfortunately, the fact is that for an individual, right, just a basic individual, even give them a BS in physics or something, or BS in political science, to try to understand the vast scope of power centers and what they're seeking and where they're going and who wants what is a massive undertaking. Whole departments of political science try to do this and fail. And so people still are faced with all this pressure and they want to try to understand what's going on, but they don't have the time to investigate, look, and study across a field this large, the entire globe. And so they simplify it down to some fundamental concept, right? It's the same thing with religion, right? The people over the millennia, growing up in times a lot harder than ours, facing a lot more suffering than we do, with lives that are definitely short, brutal, trying to understand why things happen, not surprisingly, just ascribe the way the world works to a single entity, one being, right, that created and controls everything. I get it.
Well, they call it the 1%, and that is a network of high-level elite families. And in the banking world and in politics, and of course deep state military. This is known to be a fact.
Well, again, deep state military means nothing to me, but the 1% valid, no question. We have plenty of statistics to show who is in the top 1% of wealth and who is in the top 1% of income. And in fact, we have very detailed studies across the board. And when you look at them, what you discover, and this is where the real problem is that there is a tremendous curve where you start with the number of people at certain levels of wealth and income, and then you start going up. And at that 1% level, the total amount of wealth and income is ridiculous, which means that we have a massive income and wealth gap in the United States. It's probably the biggest in the history of humanity, frankly. It's really quite extraordinary. And as a result, you have a lot of people that have money and influence, and you have the vast majority of people that have a lot less and don't have that influence. That's basic. It's one thing to say that there's a certain percentage of people at the top with enormous income. It's another to try to ascribe to that 1% supernatural powers, or they're organizing in a very controlled way. They're all meeting in special groups in the basement of cathedrals in Europe. I don't know. No, this 1% or
perhaps they do. They certainly meet at the Bilderberg meetings and at the Bilderberg Group, a Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, Federal Reserve, you name it.
Yeah, there are meetings that are held by people of influence, though again, not necessarily 1%. Not everybody in these meetings is in the 1%. In fact, most of the 1% is not represented, but they're influenced. And the world needs to be run. The world needs to be managed, I assure you.
And do you enjoy or do you condone the way that it is managed and the way that it's run right now?
Oh, there's plenty of ways I condone how it's managed, I assure you. The biggest problem with and this is because of the Cold War. The real concern is that these people come together to discuss the world and the future and even policies, and they pretty much defer to secrecy. And so the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group and some of the others are, the problem is they're not transparent enough. And so that just generates paranoia within the public. And that's an elitist kind of thinking, right? I'm so important and so forth that you really don't need to know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it in your to service your well-being. That's got to stop. So we've got to start having transparent with these large, very substantive organizations where people from many parts of the world and many aspects of the social and economic system come together to talk about how things need to go. I don't mind that. I assure you, if somebody isn't thinking about where things need to go, things are going to go pretty badly. And you've got other groups which, like the Bohemian Grove thing, which is just asinine absurd. And that kind of thing in the Bohemian Grove, which should be absolutely abolished.
Well, there you have it. You talked about people meeting in secrecy. Well, certainly that one has become very, very, well, infamous would be the word, right?
But it's not so much infamous for like a kind of complex organizational decisions that are made.
Why not? What if it's taken place there?
Nah, most of them just sit there, talk to each other, smoke cigars, and do stupid stuff.
Do you know that? Do you know that for a fact?
Yeah, there's people that have been in there and actually, gone there.
Spoken to you about it?
Yeah, published.
Yeah, but how can we trust them? How can we trust these, well, very elitist people who've been there? We
have some information about it. Yeah, people go off to the side. They may talk about any number of things. Powerful people can get together and talk. They don't have to go to the Bohemian Grove. They can go to a high-end restaurant in New York, and they can talk about the future of the economy of America. I'm just saying that the Bohemian Grove is silly. It's dumb. It's stupid. It's kind of like a college fraternity.
Like the Skull and Bones.
The world has gone from a time when you had a vastly ignorant population, significantly not able to read or write, being ruled over by monarchs and kings and authoritarians virtually worldwide, completely without power, completely kept in the dark, utterly at the mercy of what we'll call the ruling class. And over time, the public, the people, citizens began to say, this is just not working. And they started to push back and start creating institutions that would allow the whole population to influence the course of events and their nation. They made progress. It was slow, very, very slow.
Or maybe it's just a clever game in order to make the general population believe that they actually have a say in any of this, and even...
No, I don't think it's a clever game. I think that very significant progress has been made, particularly through the work of social and political activists, to try to increase the ability and influence of people over the ruling class. I assure you that if anybody living today who has a real problem with what's going on were to be time teleported back to 1612 in Europe, they would be aghast. They would be, oh my God. So it's not like that. We've made a lot of progress. But the wealthy, and capitalism generates a lot of wealth. It's the greatest wealth generator, I think, ever. Are still here, and they still have lots of influence, and they can exercise their power, and they do. And so there is a rather intense process underway where the general public, now equipped with the most powerful networking technology ever conceived, and I'm talking about the internet, plus billions of computers, are interconnecting and pushing back against a number of things, which is why we have increasing information about Bilderbergers and about the Council on Foreign Relations and who the rich are and how much money they have and what they do.
So they can't do it covertly anymore like they used to in the same way.
Well, there's plenty of covert stuff going on in this world, I assure you, and that hasn't changed. And I can only speak to what's overt, and what's overt is substantial. So we know a lot more about the relationships at the high end, and also the status quo of the middle class. We measure it very carefully. We know where the developing countries are and what has to happen there. And now the question is, really, is the general public going to exercise the power that it has, but I don't think knows that it has? The vast majority of people have yet to realize how powerful the internet is and how they could use it to push back against the wealthy, right, who are serving their interests. And the point I tried to make earlier was the interests of the wealthy do not all coincide. And they will fight each other at will and even try to destroy each other. But nevertheless, they've got power.
But it's very successful mass mind control, right? And that is the reason why people don't fight back, really, because they think that whatever they're told through the mainstream media is the truth. And they don't ask questions. And also the internet that you say is a successful tool, it's also very successful for the elite, right? In order for surveillance and to obtain all kinds of data about, well, practically anybody.
Yeah, it's a two-way street. But 400 years ago, there was no internet at all. And you had no access and you couldn't do anything. Now you can. And so let's just say that the battle continues, but the people are in the game. As far as mind control, this is not a term I use. I don't like it. It's another one of these memes that doesn't really mean anything.
Why? It's an official term. Mind control was MK Ultra.
The term does turn up in certain government research efforts. I'm not sure if it formally turns up in the literature, but it may.
Because MK is the German term for Mindkontrolle.
Yeah. Okay. So let's agree on that. And the government and the military intelligence world would love to be able to control people's minds. They would love to do a lot of things.
And do you think they do through the media and indoctrination?
Not in the way people think. In other words, one of the problems we are facing now, in other words, the realm that I intellectually operate in is macroscopic. I try to look down it from 30,000 feet and see a bigger picture. When you get down to the narrower picture, almost anything goes. But at the bigger picture, what you have is the 20th century, the most extraordinary century easily in the history of the human race. Unbelievable in so many ways. In that 100 years from 1900 to 2000, more things happened and in all the previous 300,000 years that Homo sapiens sapiens were walking around propagating. The technological curve, the population increase curve, the knowledge base curve, unbelievable. And poor human beings really didn't change all that much. The human being walking around in 1900 is exactly like the one walking around today in terms of the body, the person. We haven't evolved. There's no evolution going on. And so essentially, everybody's little cerebral cortex had to cope with this century. And that was it. They had to cope with it. And if they read a lot and learned a lot, maybe they handled it better than others. Most people didn't. And they lived through two massive world wars, over God knows how many other wars, 100, 150, it's hard to keep track. They saw the rise of atomic physics. They saw the development of the atomic bombs. They saw them dropped on human beings. And then they witnessed something truly spectacular in which two major centers of power, the capitalist West and the communist East, developed and went into a nuclear arms race where under their thinking, the more bombs and the bigger bombs you had, the safer you were. And they eventually built and created about 75,000 nuclear weapons, thousands of which were on immediate use. There were 8 countries involved. And for my entire lifetime, for my absolutely exact entire lifetime, I have lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation. A Damocles sword that is worthy of Greek myth, meaning any time it's over. And it wasn't just me, it was the entire population of the planet were living under this, except the most remote people who were blessed by not knowing much about anything and they just lived their lives. The rest of us lived under the prospect of nuclear annihilation. And in order to service the Cold War, these two big power centers and meaning their allies, right, had to develop extremely sophisticated intelligence operations so they can spy on each other. And so everybody is spying on everybody else, which it turns out was a good thing, because if they hadn't spied on each other, they would have to guess what the other side was doing. And at some point they would be so scared and paranoid that they'd go ahead and just launch the damn missiles just to be safe. So the spying is what kept things together. The secrecy system, the vast secret empires, grew and grew and grew until more and more was classified, gone completely black, and everybody knew that was going on. And so what you had from 1947 to the present is an escalating curve of increased paranoia on the part of not millions, not hundreds of millions, but billions of people. Powerless, meaning doesn't matter what I do, doesn't matter what good life I lead, at any time, some fool is going to push a button, launch a nuclear war, and everything that I care about will be gone. And those that will be here left will worship the dead. Now, that is going to create some pretty bizarre worldviews, all right? And then, after the Cold War ends, instead of like dealing with that and taking advantage of it and starting to correct some of these dysfunctions, systemic, broad-based, broad-spectrum dysfunctions, we basically continued the same behavior. We had more wars. We continue to keep the nuclear weapons. We're now upgrading them. We're almost in a new Cold War millions more people have been killed. And right, so given that fact, I am not surprised that the large number of people are frustrated, afraid, paranoid, and absolutely susceptible to any jackass that comes along with some overarching idea that explains everything, or just a pure demagogue willing to say anything in order to bring them along.
But isn't that what the presidents, all of them, are basically doing? And isn't that why there is this so-called mass mind control happening through the media in order to keep people in fear?
There isn't mass mind control happening through the media. Look, when you say things like that, I'm gonna talk back, because I don't want to be associated with that idea. It's nonsense. What is going on, right, is we have a huge amount of media now, beyond anything someone in 1850 could even imagine. Untold thousands of points of reference and information.
So then please explain Fox News, which is Republican propaganda. And please explain CNN, which is Democratic propaganda. If they were real investigative journalists, why would they even talk about propaganda? Why wouldn't they just reveal the truth and get to the core of the matter, no matter what party line or whatever you believe in?
Well, first of all, there are plenty of journalists and journalism out there trying to get to the truth, oftentimes losing their life in the process.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to speak in the mainstream media.
Well, that's an interesting statement. It's just not true. I watch a ton of mainstream media. That's hell. That's most of my life. I watch it, and I see lots of hardcore journalism being done and things being uncovered by journalists. And then if you move to just outside the fringe of the mainstream, and again, what is mainstream media? And nobody's really refined it, but we know it's kind of the big news operations, the big newspapers. And when you move a little to the side, you start seeing the growth of more independent investigative journalists, ProPublica, Intercept, and others. And so there's that. And then, of course, there's a billion podcasts and other alternative medias, and they're all competing for our attention. They're all competing for our worldview.
But is there actually anybody who's trying to just get to the truth? Just to look at things the way they are? Try to reveal and go behind whatever is on the surface?
Yeah, there are. There are plenty of people doing that.
In the mainstream media?
And media of any kind.
Right.
Right. There's even amateurs out there trying to do it. They're not going to do much because they don't have any money. There's legitimate journalists working all the time. And when you get into the mainstream top end media, it gets a little trickier, because the way we work the system in the United States, it wasn't always this way. If you go back into the 40s and the 50s and even to the 60s, the news operations for the networks, which is, television is a big deal, were loss generators for the networks. They made their money off the entertainment, and they provided the news as a public service. They didn't make money, but they thought it was the right thing to do. And that time was a little bit different. There's no question. It doesn't mean that there wasn't plenty of bias here, there, and everywhere. But eventually, it shifted into the news becomes a money generator. And so whether you're talking about MSNBC, CNN, Fox, ABC, CBS, NBC News, they are money generators, and that's based on ratings. And so suddenly, the way they present the news, what they choose, is starting to be influenced by whether it makes money.
So that is biased indoctrination, isn't it?
It's not indoctrination, but it is a limiter and affects choices that they might otherwise not make if money wasn't on the line.
But not truthful reporting.
There's plenty of truthful reporting, right? Look, we have a president that has been telling everybody that all of the top-end media are fake news. And he's an absolute idiot, all right? He shouldn't even be within 10,000 miles of the White House. And the reason he got there is because of the systemic dysfunction I was talking about. And so he's been telling everybody it's fake news. So now people can't believe any news. Well, they can believe the news that comes from that one source that really appeals to whatever is bugging them.
Well, people who've been researching this for many years, they were on to that many, many years and decades before Trump became president.
He is labeling anything in any news that is unfavorable to him as fake news. He's undermining the respect for some of our most significant journalistic operations, like the New York Times, Washington Post, even the Wall Street Journal. And he'll be promoting one, and then he'll attack it later. And so now people can't believe that there's a certain segment of people that can't believe the New York Times. They can't believe this. They can't believe that. I don't know what they believe. And the problem is not that we are hopelessly entrenched in false journalism. The problem is we are hopelessly entrenched in bad politics. And as a result, people of very low quality are getting into the House and Senate and undermining the ability of people to trust anything. In other words, the propaganda mostly comes from the political class. The propaganda comes from the politicians and the parties. Their job is to try to convince you to vote for them. And in our capitalistic system, they now have to raise billions of dollars to convince you of that. It's not enough to tell you the truth. They got to lie to you repeatedly. Now, Fox News is interesting because Fox News is not a news operation. Fox News was set up by Roger Ailes to be a propaganda arm of the right. So right away, it's in trouble. And while occasionally some good journalism has been there, from the beginning, it was pure propaganda.
But the same is happening on CNN, right?
The same is not happening on CNN. I watch them all, right? And the propaganda on Fox News is thick and deep and wide, consistent and obvious. CNN has biases. MSNBC definitely has biases. They lean a little left. They tend to lean progressive, though you will find some conservatives on both of those networks. But are they propaganda operations like what Roger Ailes set up, a very sick human being? No, not even close. But Fox News obviously wants you to think that they're just like them.
But they're all promoting the same official narrative, the same stories that they want all of the world's population actually to believe, the Associated Press and going on from there.
I see plenty of different narratives turning up on these other networks. I see different narratives turning up in the major papers. I don't see an absolute unified sort of mind control meme. No, I don't see that. I do see some bias, and I can know when there's bias. I know when they're when you're talking about opinion writers, that's straightforward. The biases are pretty obvious, and they take a certain tack. If you get into hard journalism, you have to be a little more astute to be able to pick up the odd bias. But these papers and the mainstream news have gone after people on the right. They've gone after people on the left. They've brought down major players. They've brought down entertainment people. They brought down moguls, right?
What was that to serve a specific agenda?
Look, if you uncover a scandal and you report it and a person is brought down, that's just the truth. That's just facts happening. That's just a result of the truth.
Some say it's just the tip of the iceberg, that it's much worse and it goes much deeper than that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I'm not in the utopian business, okay? I'm not trying to find utopia. I know I live in a society where I think something like 3% of the murders ever get resolved. Maybe it's 4%, I don't know, which means that 96 out of every 100 murders, they get away with it, right? So I guess you could say that, things are really much worse than they appear on the surface. And that's true of countless things, okay? The job of journalists is not to create utopia. It's not be able to dig up everything that's out there and lay it in front of you. It's to be able to find out what's going on, to particularly challenge power, right? Which is one of the fundamental purposes of journalism, to put the heat to the power, try to find out what's going on so that the general public cannot be blindsided and taken further advantage of. And they do what they can, but the total breadth of power and influence and things going on, I assure you, there's not enough journalists to cover it. Now, if we wanted to, instead of spending $1.2 trillion a year on nuclear weapons and intelligence and other defense-related matters, $1.2 trillion a year, we might cut that down to $500 million a year and start investing hundreds of millions of dollars into expanding journalism schools, hiring teachers, and generally educating the public to what journalists do and try to restore them to a little higher level of prestige. We don't do that because, you see, it is in the interests of propagandists to run down journalists. It's in the interest of the power to run down journalists. It's in the interest to attack them. You want an agenda? If I'm wealthy and I'm committing crimes, if I'm Jeffrey Epstein, if I'm a lying politician who's lied his whole way all the way into the Senate, the one thing I don't want is people believing what journalists are saying. And so I will tell you they're terrible, they're awful, I'll run them down, I'll do what Trump is doing. And so where is the agenda here? The agenda is not in the journalistic class, it is in the political class. And the problem we're having in the world right now is a political problem. It is not a journalistic problem. The journalistic problem can be fixed. The political problem we are not fixing. We're continuing to elect psychopaths into high power. We're continuing to let these leaders get away with murder. We're still not exercising the kind of power we have because of the internet. Now, if you just sit in your ass and just watch cat videos on Facebook and let the power elite, right? I'll use that phrase because it's so popular these days. See how they can use the internet to exert even more influence about what you think and what you buy, then you will deserve the outcome you get. But if you choose to give up the cat videos and start using the internet as a way to collectively come together and put influence on the government, particularly when they're about to do something really stupid, then suddenly the internet becomes the nightmare of the political power class. Now, I can give you a perfect example of that. This happened about a year and a half ago, all right? Roughly. Two bills had been working their way through the House and the Senate. Both of they were two different bills with two different names. And the acronyms I don't have. It's easy enough to find. And when bills are working their way through the House and Senate, people don't pay that much attention to it, except the lobbyists. They may pay attention, and some of the activists, and they may put up something. But overall, it's early. But at some point, these bills come out of committee. And when they come out of committee, that means they can go to the floor to vote. And about the same time, these two bills that were going to suppress net neutrality. Right? These are anti-net neutrality bills, though they were couched as being, favorable, but they weren't. Were on their way to a vote, and the internet reacted. How did it react? Well, a number of major internet sites said, on this particular day, we're going black. In other words, you're going to get a black screen in protest of these votes. That's our way of saying, don't let these votes pass. Now, it was interesting, and I saw that. Google did something else. Google went not totally black on that page, but at the bottom of the page, they put in a link to where you could sign a petition demanding that Congress not pass these bills. They had something like 7 million signatures within 15 hours. Both of those bills were pulled by the sponsors, and they weren't passed. Now, they've been trying to sneak anti-net neutrality bills back in from time to time, but the pushback is always there. And there's a few other examples that are going on where and some money is usually involved. Somebody has to have some money to be able to support this in order to promote it, where millions of people are coming together in net and saying, no, you're not going to do that. And that's just the beginning. Again, the power of the internet is vast, and most people haven't don't understand that yet. They don't know how to use it. The damn thing just turned up 25 years ago. Nobody asked for it. It wasn't ordered up. It was just dropped in our lap, right? By DARPA. And Mosaic turns up. And people are now supposed to figure it out. And most of them didn't go to school about this. They just started using it. It's an experiment on the entire human race, just 25 years. In the early days of the internet, here's how we used it. Bulletin boards got going, but then email turned up, and the way people were using it was conducting worldwide what we call flame wars, meaning, wow, I can email somebody, or I can post on a bulletin board, even as an anonymous person, what a total asshole this other person is, and why their ideas are unbelievably stupid, and then that person can insult me, and it would start going on. It would last for weeks and months. Smart people insulting each other in ways that are really quite impressive. Flame wars, utter waste of time. But that was people kind of figuring out, wow, I got this thing, how am I going to use it? And then social media comes along, and for a lot of people, that was posting cat videos. All right, I get it, right? They like cat videos, and they post them, and people get a laugh. Right? We're still figuring out. Other kids, particularly in school, came up with a different way to use the internet. They bullied the hell out of the kids they didn't like, the ones that don't get to sit at their lunch table. They attacked them. And the people that were being attacked, again, not really understanding the internet, did not have the emotional response that was probably appropriate. And so they went in the bathroom and hung themselves. So we're still working it out. My job as a political activist, deeply involved in the net, among other things, is to help people start to understand that the internet is the way they can take back their power, take back their more control over what they how they live their lives, to put more influence on the members of Congress, the members of Parliament. Now, the people in Russia don't have that luxury because they now have an authoritarian ruler, Putin. Though they do get on the internet and do a lot of stuff, less so in China. But the trend is inevitable. You know, any nation now that tries to shut the internet down, meaning you can't have it anymore, is going to have a whole bunch of people coming to their dachas, dragging them out into the woods and setting them on fire. We are past the point of no return. And so now what we have to do is to get rational about the internet, to get rational about the information that's coming across. And we're not. It's madness. It's paranoia. It's absurdity. And that's not helping.
More people are also waking up because of the internet and all of the information. And I think most people must use, discernment and try to find their own way through all of this information coming out there in all of those different places. You can go Google and YouTube.
There was a poster that was popular years ago, and it basically showed this 6-car garage, and in every one of the bays was a multi-$100,000 car. And the heading on the poster is why you get your college degree, right? This is why you get your college degree. It was funny. Here's why you get your college degree now. This is why education is more important than ever. And I say that in a time when American education is on the decline badly. So this is not good, right? The internet is the #1 reason why you must get an education as deep as you can go, read, learn, because without an education, without a decent amount of knowledge and understanding, your ability to be able to pick out from the internet what is nonsense, what is truth, what is propaganda will be very, very limited. And essentially, you will be at the mercy of it.
But I think I've heard you say, or certainly many people say, that the educational system is also the dumbing down system.
Dumbing down is a phrase I don't like to use much, but I will say that the education system in the United States is in decline in many ways. One of the ways is that we still have a vast underclass who are not getting educated with high dropout rates.
But what about those who who are getting well educated, and
the ones that are getting educated, the ones that take full advantage of the education system, which is also getting difficult because now college costs have gone through the moon. And so now a lot of people don't go to college, they simply can't afford it. And so maybe they learn how to weld and they can make a life. You can live. But without broad-based knowledge, you are not going to be able to deal with the internet.
why not the internet?
Because if you don't have a substantial knowledge base, you can't sort through.
But knowledge, official knowledge that you're told through the media and through the history books, or actually revelations about what is maybe really is going on in the world.
I'm talking about the knowledge you get from learning. Okay.
But what if that is also indoctrination?
Look, we put it this way. Anything you read or hear can be indoctrination.
So we must learn to think for ourselves as well, right? And use our intuition.
Well, how do you think for yourself if you don't know anything, right? I mean, a baby born, theoretically at that moment, knows absolutely nothing, right? But technically can think for itself. Its thoughts may not be particularly complicated, but it's thinking for itself. We are the product of what we learn. And what we learn may be of high quality, it may be of low quality, but the idea that there is this space that people can go to that is utterly free of any bias or any information that isn't absolutely pure fact, which where you can kind of get to in the deepest realms of science. Scientists, where they want to operate is within a bubble where everything that they're dealing with has already been established as fact through rigorous scientific method, and then they try to work from there. And that's one of the nice things about science, because almost every other endeavor, you don't have that luxury. So the rest of us are out in this very complicated mass of information coming in from all directions, and some of it's true and some of it's false, some of it's propaganda and some of it's just stupidity. And you have to decide what, in your view, is substantive, useful, not destructive. You have to make these decisions. And so if you come across a website that tells you how to make an atomic bomb, right, you have to decide if that's a good idea or not.
Let's hope that most people don't go to such websites. But I must get you back on track in terms of the UFO topic, because I wanted to ask you, why is it significant that the US government in particular will finally disclose the existence of UFOs and alien life in the universe and possibly also on planet Earth?
First of all, it's true. It's the truth. Wow. Truth. There are extraterrestrials here. It's true. So we should know that truth. Right? Secondly, the implications of that truth are enormous, affecting and ultimately affecting everybody on the planet to one degree or another, affecting our political decisions going forward, affecting just about everything that you can imagine. And that's a big deal, okay? That's a big deal. So if the government tells you, oh no, there's nothing there at all, and it's a huge truth with huge implications, that is basically the government stepping in and saying, and utterly trying to change your reality. It's trying to change the world. It's like standing on the edge of the ocean and demanding that the tide doesn't come in. So that's not going to work. One of the macroscopic points of view that I work with is that there's no utopia, there's no promised land. Life is hard. Plenty is going to go wrong. Terrible things are going to happen. However, history has shown that when you're operating from a truth basis as opposed to a lie basis, the outcomes generally are better. Perfect? No. Is tragedy always avoided? No. But in general, if you govern from truth, if in your relationships you interact from truth, the outcomes are likely to be much better. And the corollary to that is that we have plenty of historic examples of countries who have operated from high degrees of propaganda, meaning well away from truth. And we've watched those nations literally implode, be destroyed, wiped up, fall apart. And in our very personal lives, we have encountered people who have maybe friendship relationships, or they're married, and we kind of figure out that there's a whole lot of lying going on between them, and then we watch those relationships end badly. So just on that general concept, even though I cannot predict where the world is going to be in 50 years after disclosure, I can say with some confidence that if government starts telling the truth about this ET reality and allows the people to start getting accurate information about it and learning about it and understanding it, that the outcome has a much higher probability of going well than if the government continues to lie about it, deny it, obscure it, undermine it. And that's just a general concept. But that doesn't mean that, it may turn out that 500 years from now, the historians come back and say, oh my God, because the government lied all those years, things worked out great. Had they told them the truth, it would have been awful. I don't know.
But what is the truth about the ET or alien reality, as you just said?
Let's rephrase that question. What are the aspects of the extraterrestrial phenomena issue that have high evidentiary support? Okay? That's a better way of putting it. We know they're here.
How do we know? You know that they are there, but what is your best evidence for the existence of alien or extraterrestrial beings?
Well, if one were to do the research, which is what you have to do to see the evidence, right?
How long have you been researching this topic?
How long I've been researching, it really doesn't much matter. I'm drawing on the research of hundreds of people going back 70 years. Each person doesn't have to, I know something about quantum mechanics. That doesn't mean I have to actually go and rediscover it. The evidence is there to be read, to be seen. And when you look at that evidence, we have photos of the craft. We have videos of the craft. We have untold numbers of eyewitnesses to the craft, including pilots. We've got radar tracking combined with visual, combined with video tracking. We've got over 1 million reports from individuals who are describing direct contact with these extraterrestrials, which we call the contact phenomena, the abduction phenomena. We've got statements from people inside government. And there's been about 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 books written about the subject. That's the evidence. It would fill rooms, right? And that's it. In other words, here's the problem that anybody in this field faces. Let's imagine a major trial. I'd say the Simpson trial, but he was found not guilty on a jury nullification. But you're sitting in on a major trial. It goes on for 2 months with 100 witnesses and testimony and cross-examination. And at the end of the trial, you're on the jury. You all come to the agreement that the person is guilty. And then you leave. And then a couple months later, somebody who thinks the person was not guilty comes up to you and says, I think the person was not guilty. Now, where's the evidence that the person is guilty? And you say, well, the evidence was presented in the trial that I attended, which you didn't attend. And I'm not going to rehash a 2-month trial. Maybe go read the transcripts or something. So in other words, these kinds of questions are absurd. And one of the reasons why they exist at all is because of the totally bizarre situation we have been in. I'm not saying it hasn't happened in the past. It has. But I would say that this last 70 years, we really set a milestone here in which theoretically the most democratic nation in the world, with the most providing a constitution providing the most rights to people of any nation in the world, with a situation where people have a huge amount of access to information they can share. This country made the decision for national security reasons that a fact, namely the presence of extraterrestrials, had to be denied, even though the extraterrestrials were coming and going as they pleased and doing whatever the hell they wanted in often plain sight.
Why do you think they're doing that and have kept doing that for so many years?
It's a complex answer, but the fundamental answer is national security. The history of the truth embargo, which created this totally bizarre situation where 70 years on, you still got people out there going, "No, there's no ETs here."
Since Roswell in 47.
Yeah, since then. I mean, people are out, even today, there are people that say there's no ETs here, there can't be, and you ask them why, and you say, because the government says they're not here.
Or they haven't seen them themselves.
Or I haven't personally seen them. Yeah, I mean, I can't. There's nothing I can say about that, other than it's ridiculous. But it's not. It's the government's fault because they made the decision that they were going to embargo this issue. Not just embargo it like they embargoed Cuba, but embargo it and claim at the same time there's no Cuba there. In other words, we're embargoing something down there. Well, what is it? It's not really there.
But when most people haven't seen these extraterrestrials or witnessed, been a contactee themselves or seen UFOs or anything like that, how can they believe in it?
They only have one course of action, and that is to study it, to learn about it, to review the evidence. And if they don't, then they don't know. And that's fine. They can not know about this subject. If you go to my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, you go into the resources section, you scroll down to the print media archive. What will you find there? You will find the largest archive of mainstream English language articles about the extraterrestrial issue in the world. 12,000 articles. And I believe that represents no more than 50% of the actual number of articles, because it's very difficult to find articles prior to 1940, prior to the not 1940s, 70s, 80s. Very difficult, but they're there. You have to go through microfiche and so forth. I've got a big pile of articles from that period.
But whenever you have been interviewed on the mainstream media or anybody else in this field, it's always been presented like it's, speculative, and it's just, just an idea and maybe. And
you know what I say when somebody says that to me in an interview? I say, au contraire, it's a fact, right? It is a fact. And so to answer your earlier question, the situation in 1947 was extraordinary on so many levels. And that year is going to get a lot more treatment historically than it's gotten so far. I mean, there's going to be books written about just that year. It's an amazing year. But essentially, by 1947, the United States military and intelligence operations, which included at that time, there was no Air Force, but it was an Army Air Force, and the CIA wasn't there. It was the OSS, whatever. These are pretty competent people, very sharp. Very, very competent people. They had just defeated the Nazis and the Japanese, the axis of powers. These are not trivial people. And by early 1947, they were aware that, one, the Soviets had gotten the atomic bomb secrets to add to whatever research they were already doing. They knew the Soviets had gotten the hydrogen bomb secrets. We knew that the Soviets had gotten some of the missile scientists in Germany. We didn't get them all. and they were working on missile technology, and they were going to build their own bomb, which they did and tested it a year and a half or so later. There was already an Iron Curtain across Europe, as proclaimed by Winston Churchill. And so these, mostly men, right? I mean, there aren't a lot of women in the high ends of the military and the intelligence community, I can assure you, properly assumed that the next war was coming. We were going to have a third world war, and it would be nuclear.
Many UFO researchers have said that they believe that the aliens, or at least UFO crafts, took part in disarming nuclear missiles.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. That's a very good point, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's get back to your question. Why did they do this truth embargo? And because, you know, that, and by the way, that tie-in is pretty profound. It's one of the most profound things I talk about, and I'll get to it shortly. And so they had a real problem on their hands. I mean, they really, and so they knew they were going to have to gear up. They were going to have to obviously advance their bomb technology research. They're going to have to start building missiles real quickly because it didn't look like the Soviet Union and the United States were going to get down and sing Kumbaya anytime soon. And so they began that process, right? But something else was happening that they didn't fully understand. They weren't the only ones paying attention. The extraterrestrials were also paying very close attention to what was going on. They watched the World War II take place. I'm sure they were impressed. They monitored it in various ways, including shadowing our airplanes and all in many of the theaters of combat. And they watched us kill each other in pretty substantial numbers. And then they watched us start to convert the atomic physics we're learning into a weapon. They watched us tested it. Watched us test it at Los Alamos, Trinity test. They watched us then use it. And there was two ways we could have used it. We could have dropped, which is what a lot of the Manhattan scientists wanted. They wanted us to drop the first bomb in Tokyo Bay and scare the hell out of the Japanese. And if that didn't work, drop one in another bay somewhere just offshore. And they made a very powerful case. But the military made a different case to Truman. The military, of course, were the ones fighting the war. And they had lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of their men and women. They were not happy about that. They weren't happy about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And so they made the case that, no, you must drop this on a city. And Truman agreed. He dropped it on a city, and the militarist in Japan tried to make the case to the emperor, no, we should fight on. We can win this.
That was in Nagasaki, right?
The emperor held off, and then he dropped another one on Nagasaki. And militarists still did not want to surrender, but they were overruled by Emperor Hirohito. And they surrendered, and we didn't have to invade Japan, and then we rebuilt Japan and made it into a fantastic nation. Now, the extraterrestrials, I believe, and now I'm speculating, this is purely speculation on my part based upon everything I know and trying to at least grasp some of the basis for these things, but I could be proven completely wrong. Nevertheless, my take is that the extraterrestrials really noted when we dropped those bombs on people. And that meant that they had a problem, a very big problem. And what was the problem the extraterrestrials have? Is that they fully understand the technological learning curve that we were on. They knew how they had a pretty good idea when we were going to start punching through other major technological thresholds: genetic science, artificial intelligence, lasers, possibly even antimatter weapons, and most importantly, interstellar drive. And they were right. We're already closing in on how to circumvent relativity.
So they intervened.
And so they intervened. Why? Because if you are in an alliance of extraterrestrial civilizations from different planets, in most cases, operating in interstellar space, able to travel the galaxy and do what you want to do. The one thing you cannot let happen is a new, nascent, advanced technology civilization, develop interstellar craft, and then just to be safe, and because, as far as they're concerned, the galaxy should be free carry, put atomic and nuclear and hydrogen bombs on those craft, and then sail on out into the galaxy. That cannot happen. There is no way any rational alliance would allow this to happen. It would be utterly stupid. And so that's not going to happen. And so now they have to, quote, intervene. And that intervening starts in early 1947. Sightings everywhere around the world, a clear escalation. And then it gets interesting because a couple of craft crash in New Mexico, and we get bodies and we get the craft, which has potential for technological reengineering. It's also notable that the ETs who probably could have done so did not reclaim that. Those bodies did not come and get them, did not come and get the tech. They left it with us. And so began the modern era of the extraterrestrial history.
Please talk about President Eisenhower, who supposedly met with alien beings in 1953, I believe it was. What do you believe happened at that meeting, if you think it actually occurred? And was a treaty being signed there by Eisenhower?
Here's what I know with confidence. Eisenhower was briefed on the extraterrestrial issue. Anything he wanted. He was a 5-star general who helped defeat the Axis powers. He got whatever information he wanted. Truman obviously knew as well. He was briefed. And then Eisenhower took over not too much longer after that. We had bodies. And the witnesses indicated that we have one living ET. It is not unreasonable to assume that the opportunity arose for Eisenhower to see those bodies and possibly even see or be in the presence of the live extraterrestrial, assuming it was still alive at that point. We don't know for sure how long it lived.
It wasn't extraterrestrials who are here already on Earth or traveled here, or so-called walk-ins?
Let's just put it this way. If you've got a couple of $100,000 to bet on this, put your money down on sentient species from another planet. Because if you put your money down anywhere else, you're going to lose it. There's a tiny chance that they're from other dimensions. There's a tiny chance they're from the inner Earth, and a tiny, tiny chance they're from the future.
How so? Why do we need to have a limitation of the possible?
Because limiting, or at least focusing on what has the most evidence, what makes the most sense. It's called Occam's razor, right? It's helpful. You don't completely eliminate other possibilities, right? But the idea that you have an overwhelming amount of evidence that there are other planets, other biospheres, and no basis whatsoever to think that they don't develop advanced life, you want to put your money there, not on the fact that they come from the future simply because some science fiction writer wrote about it or appeals to people.
Maybe that science fiction writer you're talking about, I don't know who you're referring to, but maybe they were briefed. Most things that are hinted or put in Hollywood movies sometimes have some kind of, a reference to what might actually be real.
Well, let's just say that I'm not going to predicate my decisions about what to pursue and how to assess information based upon what science fiction writers were writing in the 50s and 60s, and I read a lot of them. So to get back to your questions, it's very possible that on that trip that Eisenhower made west, that they carved out some time for him to go inspect either the wreckage and or the bodies and even the living entity. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Now, remember, the government says there are no ETs. And Roswell was a mogul balloon and crash test dummies. So according to the government's narrative, Eisenhower couldn't have gone to see ETs or wreckage. And so what do we got? What we got is that gap between what the government is saying and what people are suspecting. And it's in that gap where the imagination of human beings, bless their hearts, we have the biggest imaginations of any, I think, animal on the planet. What we can imagine is rather spectacular.
But you certainly believe that there are many different alien races in the universe, right?
Yes.
Okay, so please talk about the different alien races that you are aware of. How many different types of extraterrestrials do you know of, and who are the benevolent ones and who are the malevolent ones?
Boy, you really, you must think that I'm a whole lot smarter than I am.
I'm just getting into it.
Yeah, that's fine. Look, when it comes to the extraterrestrials, the vast majority of information we have about them directly comes from the contactee reports, period. All right. They're not sending out videos of themselves. They're not emailing their bios to the newspapers. We get it from the contact reports. Now, there are a lot of contact reports. I believe they're well above 1 million in writing already. And of course, quite a few people have been interviewed and been written up in books. So we have many that have been featured, but most of the reporting was done privately, sent to researchers. These contact reports describe events and ETs.
So you think there may be millions?
No. I said there. Millions of contactees? Yes.
Not a million different alien races.
No. So when you those that have looked at a lot of these reports, and the money has never been there to do a mass survey of these reports, which is a project that needs to be done, but it would cost a ton of money, $1 million, $2 million, and we don't have money like that because there are no ETs, right? There's a bell curve. Right? You know what a bell curve is. So in the center and under that bell curve is where the consistent reports are, where you've got stuff that corresponds, similar, and what have you. And then as you move out to the edges, you get some wild stuff, some of which may be completely made up, some of which might be a one-off, who knows. And in that bell curve, we have learned a lot. One of the reasons we've learned a lot is that given that so many contactees there are, some of them are pretty good artists. They can paint, they can draw. Some have conscious memories of the event. Some retrieve those memories later through regressions. And so they've drawn them. You can actually go online and see them.
How much of that is real, do you think, or just faked?
Well, no. The reason I'm saying this is because of you've got all these reports, and you've got a bell curve of consistency. So you've got a person here over in Belgium that's describing the ET that they're interacting with, and you got somebody in Montana describing it, and they're basically the same type. And you get enough of those, and that gives you high confidence that in fact is what they look like, because a lot of people are reporting the same type. And some artists have drawn them. And so if you go online and you go to images and you go to extraterrestrial types, you will see a lot of renderings of the ETs that are most consistently reported by contactees.
So the most consistent ones, please talk about those races. How many types are you aware of?
Well, again, the number is not clear. I can't give you a number. I know that the Greys, which is now an archetype in American culture, it's all over the place. The Greys are the most common, and they are different. They tend to have different sizes. There's about 3 different sizes, and there's some subtle differences.
The tall whites are also part of the Greys, or what?
I don't know. The tall whites might be the tall Greys. The tall white pretty much owes its genesis almost completely to Charles Hall and his accounting of what he experienced at the Nellis Range. But let's just say the Greys are the most common.
Is that the Greys? Are they the ones that are also described by researcher Linda Moulton Howe as the Ebens?
Yeah, pretty much. It's interesting. Again, we're trying to understand something that is hidden from us, that has been manipulated by the government and undermined. It's tough, but the drawings that I have seen of the ET at Roswell are not the ones that were turning up in the contact reports years later. I think they were a side group that happened to be around when this transition took place. One of the indications from that is that what crashed as Roswell were not saucers, but semi-aerodynamic Chevron craft that undoubtedly also had anti-gravitics. And these ETs don't look like the Greys. And some people call them the Ebens, whatever. But the point is I think they and maybe a number of other groups were basically told that we have some business now to attend to and you need to go. But who knows? Anyway, we're talking about the reports that started coming in the 80s about contact that expanded and has expanded for the next 40 years. You got the Greys. You've got the reptoids, which look reptilian. You've got the insectoids, which look insect-like. You've got the Nordics, which look like Swedes, good-looking Swedes, I should say. And that's the kind of the key group. There's a blue thing that is turned up from time to time, and so forth. But those, are the key ones. So the number 5 or 6 is thrown around. You hear this number 57 types of ETs. It's a meaningless number to me. I don't think anybody knows.
So are there any benevolent ones or are they malevolent? We often hear about the malevolent ones such as the reptilians or the insectoids.
The word malevolent and benevolent, these are human terms, and they're relative.
But maybe you can put your own term on it then.
Yeah, I here's my term. I don't think in terms of good and evil. It's subjective. Benevolent and malevolent, subjective. What is less subjective, and I tend to be more comfortable with, is destructive or constructive. You've got people that go and build houses. And you've got arsonists that go and burn them down. Now, the people that are building the houses might be evil sons of bitches. And the arsonist might be a really nice guy that takes care of his mother. But in terms of their actions, one's destructive and one's constructive. Right? So when you think like that, you get away from so much of the anthropomorphic traps that people get in all the time when trying to deal with the extraterrestrial issue. We're having to assess it from our platform, which is human platform, and a human brain and human information. In other words, everything is in that perspective. The ETs are not human, though they may have some human DNA in them, or some Earth DNA in them, which is another fascinating discussion. They're from another planet. They evolved over 3 billion years in a biosphere we probably couldn't live in for 20 minutes. And so now we're trying to understand them from our anthropomorphic platform. This is very hard to do. That's why you have to stick with this for a while. And I've been at it 23 years. Linda Moulton Howe's been at it, I think, almost 50 years. You put enough years in, and you get better and better at getting away from the anthropomorphic platform.
So how can we describe the constructive ones or the destructive ones?
One, they could blow us up anytime they want to, and they haven't. All right, so that's good. 2, they could wipe us out with any number of virtually untreatable diseases that they could introduce into our environment. They haven't. They put these wonderful agroglyphs down in the fields of, mostly in the fields of the United Kingdom, year after year, getting more complicated, particularly starting in the early years going forward, more and more complicated each year.
The crop circles you're referring to.
Yeah, agroglyphs, crop circles. Knowing that every year more and more people, because there's a season when this happens, right? There's the crop circle season. More and more people are going there. They're going as tourists. They're bringing ultralight airplanes. They're bringing infrared cameras, not night vision cameras, to try to catch them. And there's been a number of instances where we think there's been some, in fact, evidence actually on video of them putting these crop circles down. The most interesting evidence, though, the one I love, is that because of the planes, particularly the ultralights, but they even go over in planes, a Cessna 192 can get down pretty slow. And they're flying over trying to see what's going on. And so somebody will fly over this field at noon and head on down for a while, looking to see if any new crops, and they'll turn around and maybe come back 10 minutes later, and suddenly in that field they just flew over is a huge crop circle.
Maybe these beings have the ability to stop time and then start it again, and then a second later it's there.
You really should become a science fiction writer. That's where your head's at. You do very well as a science fiction writer.
I've been speaking to a lot of different researchers over the years.
I understand that. But stopping time is pretty far away from Occam's razor. The most logical explanation is the damn thing was put down in 10 minutes. And I assure you, there aren't enough crop circle makers in the UK. I don't care how smart they are with their little tools, who could have rushed out in that field and put that crop circle down in 10 minutes. And so either it's being done by human-based technology in order to just drive people crazy, or it's being done by extraterrestrials. And we also have studied those crop circles, and we have found the anomalies in them sufficient to the point where a good researcher can go into a crop circle and tell you in 10 minutes whether this is human-made or whether this is non-human-made. And so they're doing that. And these crop circles are beautiful and complex. And people love to take pictures of them, and those pictures are beautiful, and they're up on refrigerators all over the world. Right? Picture of a crop circle. This is not destructive.
But we don't know if they're alien-made or made by extraterrestrials. But could they be made by, let's say, military technology that we haven't been told about?
It's possible. You can never rule that out, though. Remember, these things started getting made a long time ago, and so that tech would have had to have been available. That tech has never shown up anywhere else.
Some people say that the military, the deep state factions of the military, have technology that is at least 100 years ahead of what we know about, what we were told officially.
100 years, 50 years, 20 years, 2.5 years, I don't know. But I would give maybe a 5% chance that all of these crop circles are either made by teenagers with nothing much to do, or by advanced deep black technology in order to, quote, I don't know, confuse us. I give it a 5%. You go to Vegas based on 5%, you will arrive in a nice car, you will leave on a bus. So I'm confident that by saying, in 95%, I'm confident in saying these are almost certainly extraterrestrial. So that's not destructive. In fact, it's kind of positive. All right, so far, so good.
So these extraterrestrials can travel how in order to get to the Earth? Or maybe they're just here already.
There's a possibility they've been here all along, but that I would put that at about 0.1%. They travel here in interstellar craft. They move around in our airspace in antigravitic craft. We do not know if the antigravitic tech that's in the saucers is in fact the same technology they're using to get between stars. I would guess not. But we have crashed vehicles of the near Earth type, but we don't have a crashed mothership. If we had a crashed mothership, I assure you that would make the news. Those are off world. So, but that's, and there's some very interesting theories out about how the antigravitic craft are working, and I'm talking about sophisticated theories being put out by some rogue physicists, but also some people that are working in the more mainstream. And then there's some theories out about the interstellar propulsion. But that's, all that's going to sort out post-disclosure, post-open contact.
What is your theory about why they're actually here?
Well, I told you, one of the reasons that they're here was the fact that they had to make a decision to intervene based on the actions of the United States, particularly, and the Soviet Union in 1945, 6, and 7. And that intervention has been consistent. It has been escalating, and it leads somewhere. I believe it's it's forcing a circumstance ultimately where we do self-disclose. We do acknowledge their presence in a formal way, so that everybody is freed up to look into this and look at it, and the government embargo is over. I believe that is the agenda. And then the agenda after that would be open contact. And the agenda after open contact, I will speculate, is, look, we're here. There's more than one of us. You're pretty advanced now. You could possibly be hanging out with us if you wanted to, but you have to get rid of the nukes. You're not going to be allowed to take nukes into space. If you don't get rid of the nukes, then we're not going to work with you.
What are your thoughts on Dr. Carol Rosin or Rosen? I don't know how you pronounce that.
Carol Rosin.
Carol Rosin, who were working with the former Nazi scientist Werner von Braun, who supposedly revealed to her that there was an alien threat, or the fear of an alien takeover, which would be some kind of a New World Order agenda.
The long and the short of that is this. I believe that Werner von Braun told her that, but that was a long time ago.
But that doesn't make it less valuable or valid.
Not on its face, but a lot has happened since then. And so my assessment of it is that he believed it when he said it, and it might have reflected the circumstances at the time. This was before the Cold War was over. But a huge amount has happened since then, and I do not believe that what the predictions that he were making are nearly as likely as they are now. We're in a different place, and so it's dated, right? It's just dated, and that's all I can say to that. One of the most significant areas of evidence regarding the ET issue is nuclear weapons tampering. It's important because the evidence is coming from nuclear facility witnesses, right? Air Force officers with high security clearances that started coming forward and saying, I think I need to tell you now that when I was working, this base and that base, something came down, hovered over the base, turned off the missiles.
Robert Hastings talked about that.
Robert Hastings is the lead researcher. Robert Salas was one of the key witnesses initially, but more have come forward. We now have evidence for a number of these incidences where they're turning off the missiles, and they were doing it in the Soviet Union as well. So is that constructive or destructive? One could interpret it both ways. First of all, they turned them off, but we turned them back on. They could have melted them down in the silo into a puddle of metal. They didn't do it. They didn't destroy them. They sent a message. Most of the witnesses believe it was a clear message. These weapons are useless. You need to get rid of them, which fits into the scenario that I was talking about earlier. And then lastly, when you get into the contact, that's when it gets tough. Because from an anthropomorphic view, a lot of what they're doing in contact with humans and abductions of humans is somewhat destructive. It's particularly destructive in those that can't deal with it, can't cope with it well, and they carry a lot of trauma with them in their life. And so they pay a price.
Because of experimentation on their bodies and on their mind.
Whatever they're doing, it's got genetics written all over it, and we believe it's gone on a long time. There's a reason they're doing it. They take you, but they bring you back. And so if you want to talk about malevolence versus benevolence, that's where that battle is going to be fought. That's where it's going to be a fascinating intellectual discourse. I'm looking forward to it, but mostly it's going to happen in the post-disclosure era.
What are your thoughts on the theory that reptilians are working with our governments behind the scenes, top elite factions of the government?
There's rumors about all kinds of ETs working behind the scenes with our government.
What are your thoughts?
Some contactees their memories include situations where they believe they are seeing ETs in the room, and also military, humans with military uniforms. Okay. I'm not going to say that's not true. I think there's been a number of those reports. In total number, don't know until a survey is done on the entire archive of reports that are in the files of many researchers. However, if that's true, that would imply immediately that there's a cooperative situation going on between parts of the U.S. military and ETs. And that's a big exopolitical question and a huge public relations problem for the government post-disclosure. However, not surprisingly, there's one other factor you can't dismiss. The extraterrestrials are capable of making you see anything they want you to see. This was particularly well represented in Steven Spielberg's mega series Taken, which hasn't been out for a while. Needs to get out, be seen again. If you're in your bed and they're standing at the end of your bed and they want you to see Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse, that's what you're going to see.
So it's like shape-shifting that people talk about.
No, I'm not saying they're shape-shifting. I'm saying that they're able to put in your mind that image. They're there. They're just standing there. ETs, just regular old ET. But you're seeing Minnie Mouse, Mickey Mouse, or Goofy, or whatever.
It's like a projection.
It's a projection. It's a manipulation of the mind, but it's pretty sophisticated, and they can do that. So could they make a contactee see another ET in the room, but see him as a Air Force officer in full uniform? Yes, they could. So that leaves open a significant question. All I can say is that the total amount of evidence that I have encountered does not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is formal engagement of governments by ETs. I'm not saying and I'm not saying it proves conclusive there isn't. So this is a huge open question, which I keep open. Others say, oh, absolutely, no, there's absolute, but they haven't got the evidence for it.
But if they are here, wouldn't it be normal to assume that they may be interacting with the top elite factions of the government?
If they want to be, they can be. But to say it, I can't say it as fact. I can say that if we learn at some point that there has been extensive engagement, direct, between formal authority and ETs, I'm not going to be shocked. But it hasn't been proven. And because it hasn't been proven, I'm careful about that. Because again, we got enough people out there paranoid to begin with, based upon a lot of bad information that's available on the net mostly.
But can we trust the official so-called proofs or statistics that is allowed to come out? Even the Freedom of Information Act, can we trust it? Papers can't be tampered with.
Look, the nature of discovery is an intellectual process where you assess each thing on its merits in the larger context. That's how we discovered the atom. One could make a case that the atom is actually a propaganda thing. There are no atoms, but the powers that be felt it would be better if we thought there were. Whatever.
It's because atoms have no solidity.
Well, technically they don't, but there's something there called an atom, and we've discovered that. So when you get out of science and you get into the world of social science and political science, yeah, it's brutal. So ultimately, and also people, if they want to deal with this issue in general and life in general, for God's sakes, give up the idea of the smoking gun. The smoking gun is one of the great illusions in human thought, right? There is no such thing as a smoking gun. What there is the ability of cumulative evidence. And so as evidence mounts from multiple sources and so forth, your ability of certainty rises. And at some point, it gets pretty high. For instance, there is a whole lot of evidence that there is a force attached to mass, which we call gravity, and it will pull you toward the center of that mass. That could be propaganda. It could be an illusion. So if you want, you can test it. You can go up on a very high building and walk off of it, thinking that, well, it could be propaganda. But you know from so much that you've seen in your life and experience that this force exists, and you'd better damn well not walk off that building. This is true of everything. And so what's happening is that people are so paranoid now, so afraid of what's going on and unsure. They've been misled and lied to by their government so many times that for them, any explanation can be attached to anything. And if they're paranoid in general, they're going to attach the most daunting one, the scariest one. This is not how you want to run a country.
You have said that our entire academic community is made up of a bunch of flagrant, craven cowards who does not dare to challenge the state system or politics in regard to UFO disclosure and alien extraterrestrial beings as a fundamental part of Earth's ancient cultures and civilizations.
That exact quote, that's a pretty good quote, though.
I heard it out of your mouth.
That's probably the strongest way I've ever put it. If you got the link to that one, I'd like to review it, and I want to hear myself say it. But look, I have said on numerous occasions.
But the real question is, do you think that academia has been gagged and the educational system has become what we just talked about earlier, a dumbing down system?
That's what the truth embargo is. It's a giant gag. It's a giant gag in the mouths of everybody in the country. The editors, publishers, general people, scientists, the whole nine yards. Gag them, keep them from talking about this, disincentivize them. However, we have a very large academic community. We have 5,000 colleges and universities. In the last 70 years, millions of professors have gone through those colleges and universities. And they are about learning. They're about truth. They're about research, discovery. They pride themselves in that. Well, in that 70 years, the evidence for the ET presence is just piled up and piled up and piled up and piled up. And the entire 5,000 colleges and universities, with the exception of a couple of vanity courses, has not taught this subject at all. That is a complete lie down on the part of not one college, not two colleges, 5,000, as well as all of the millions of professors that have gone through. It is easily the greatest academic failure in history. Nothing else comes close. And at the core of that, in other words, if you have to explain, not on an individual basis, not why that person or this college, but in general, if you want to explain how that could have happened, you have to come up with cowardice. Fundamental cowardice within the academic community, bred by dependence on government contracts, the concept of tenure, and just nasty scholastic politics, which is so bloody awful. That's why you have this wonderful phrase. The reason that university politics is so awful is because the stakes are so small. And so they failed us. They failed us, absolutely. And they failed us in other areas, right? The academic community has not stood up the way it should have in a number of instances in the 20th century. So I have a beef with them, and they're going to have to answer it to this. Because if they're capable of literally standing down en masse on the most important issue in the world, with evidence all around them, what other things are they standing down on and not getting into? Because it would be inconvenient for getting people to enroll, or irritating and some government agencies they're doing research for, or whatever the hell. How many other things are there like that? So yeah, I got a beat.
So speaking of, let's say, the deep state factions of the military or the hidden secret government, do you think it could be playing a role in possibly implementing disinformation or confusion or even real valid information in the field of ufology on purpose, like to create more conspiracies or conspiracy theories?
Well, the answer is yes, but let me again clarify here. I don't buy into the deep state meme. I don't like it. It's a mess. It's a dirty term. Doesn't really mean anything anymore. There is a military intelligence complex and a vast array of classified programs for national security reasons. That is the case.
And they are putting out disinformation about, well, the UFO or the alien existence or this topic in general.
Since the very beginning, elements within the military intelligence complex, not so much the industrial complex, but the military intelligence complex, organizations like AFOSI were assigned specific tasks to help maintain the truth embargo. Meaning the ETs are here, they fly around, but somehow we have got to keep people from engaging it. Or we have to minimize and humiliate and or ghettoize the people that are engaging it so it doesn't become a formal thing. In other words, what they're embargoing ultimately is the formal acknowledgement. They're basically saying, we don't, like with Cuba, we don't want you to go to Cuba, and with this embargo and the ET issue, we do not want you to tell the public. And by you, I mean the President of the United States. We don't want it known, we don't want it formalized, because we're not ready yet, or they're not ready yet, or whatever reason. Mostly it was national security. In other words, the truth embargo was born at the beginning of the Cold War. The people that made those decisions were under the belief there was going to be a third war, a nuclear war, and they were highly motivated to do whatever it took to protect, defend, and prevent that. And the ET issue was a problem for them. They did not want that to be formally out there in the middle of this Cold War with all these nuclear weapons being positioned on the ground, on trains, and eventually in submarines. They just could not predict the outcome. And so the policy was, it's not going to happen. And they did whatever they could to ensure it didn't happen. And that meant persuading publishers of newspapers to stand down, feeding out bad information, intimidating researchers, and a whole lot more. They spent millions and millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on this. Where it changes is when the Cold War ends. When the Cold War ends, theoretically, the biggest barrier to this truth coming out is down. And I think they were ready to do it. And they wanted to do it under a president that was appropriate and comfortable with, and that was George H.W. Bush. When he lost, they put it off. And as they put it off, things got increasingly more complicated, like we had more wars. And so the last 28 years, the reasons for the truth embargo's existence are more complicated. Before that, it was fairly straightforward. However, and not surprisingly, the truth embargo is unraveling. The program is not really being fed. In other words, they're not putting energy into it. They're not feeding it money.
Will the truth ever come out? Will the government ever reveal anything about this at all, do you think?
Well, the government has actually revealed some things from time to time, the odd thing here, the odd thing there, witness, whatever. But you mean formally? Yeah, the formal acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence is absolutely inevitable. It will happen. It's starting to look very interesting right now. And on the other side of Trump, I could easily see this thing blowing up sky high. If it wasn't for the Trump and the constitutional crisis right now, those two articles in the New York Times, December 16th, 2017, could have blown this thing sky high. But again, right now we are consumed with this constitutional crisis, which is, I'm not complaining about that. We've got to deal with this. This is not good. It's like Britain right now is dealing with Brexit. You can't even talk about anything else. Nobody gives a crap. If you're talking Brexit, I'll listen, but otherwise nothing else is important. We have a similar problem here. So, but could disclosure happen next year? You bet it could. It would not surprise me at all. And and one of the reasons I've relocated back to DC and I'm going to start the Disclosure Wire podcast is because now I think is a time where we can really get some legitimate mainstream audience. I'm going to be lobbying again on Capitol Hill. This office that you see behind me, that is just one of the sets. I have 2 more sets. It's going to be high level. I'm a member of the press club. I'm hoping to bring in some journalists and people you would never expect to see. And so Tom DeLonge and the boys are doing their thing, and I'm going to be doing my thing pretty soon because I see the end in sight. I see the finish line. I can see the lights at the finish line and the people gathered around, cheering on the last marathoners to cross over. And so I'm getting excited about it. And I'm inviting everybody else to get excited about it as well.
Just in our remaining moments, what are your thoughts on the implementation and the rollout of 5G all over the world?
Deeply concerned. I have a degree in physics. I know what they're doing. The energy level is going up and the frequency is going up. And I got a bad feeling about it. And again, this is the internet. And so there are people out there already trying to marshal resources and people to look hard at this and see if they can get the bottom of it, as opposed to waiting until 40 years later when they go, oh yeah, it caused a couple million cancers. Yeah, well, what can you do? That's what we did with asbestos. That's what we did with cigarettes. That's what we're doing with GMOs and Roundup. Well, we have the internet now.
What are the possible dangers and health effects of electromagnetic radiation and frequencies coming from 5G?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying they're taking it to another level. It's an experiment, and I don't think they know what it's going to do. Look, we all now live in an electromagnetic soup. So low end electromagnetic fields are going to do to us what they're going to do. And I imagine it affects some people and maybe causes some cancers.
But can we stop it? Can we stop the rollout of 5G?
You betcha. If enough people on the internet get behind certain organizations, start signing petitions, start emailing their congresspeople, they could raise holy hell. They don't have enough information. In other words, the industry is not particularly keen on providing the deep information. That's the way it works. You're in the dark. You don't know what's going on. We'll keep you that way, and then we're going to do to you what we want to do to you. But now we have the power to demand that information, so we'll see.
Do you think that 5G is part of an AI, artificial intelligence agenda, smart grid around Earth they're talking about?
Look, what is it? Elon Musk is going to launch 20,000 satellites or something. Hey, look, we live at a time where almost anything can happen and probably will. And, if it makes money, it'll definitely happen. And if it's bad, we're going to pay the price. But we have the power now to push back to almost any degree we want if we start to realize that collective action, whether it's unions or whether it's just collective political action, in numbers is powerful. And you don't have to spend $5 million to try to put 1 million people on the mall, which is impressive. You can have 40 million people come together on the net. And so as a political activist, I'm always telling people the net is your friend. Learn how to use it. Educate yourself so that you can sort through the nonsense and empower yourself with it. That's, without the internet, I couldn't do what I'm doing, period. Not even close. Could not possibly do it. But I watched the anti-war movements of the 60s. I watched the anti-segregation movements, and they were before the internet, and they were tough, and it was hard and expensive. And we have power way beyond what they had. And so that is one of the key reasons why, because the ET issue is fundamentally nonpartisan. It's utterly profound. It affects everybody. And the evidence is all over the place. And so if there's any issue, hundreds of millions of people could get behind and use the internet to push the government to come clean. This is it. And this interview is just one of tens of thousands of interviews and examples of that happening.
But if the extraterrestrials, they actually could intervene in terms of nuclear missiles and nuclear weapons in general, couldn't they intervene in terms of 5G and people being radiated all over the world? Nobody is safe.
The ETs are here. The ETs here have an agenda. And it's not to run us. It's not to see that we get to school on time or get up on time. It's not to see whether we put out Roundup or don't put out Roundup. If we launch a nuclear war, I do not think they will stop it. Now, if a massive meteorite the size of Mount Everest were coming this way, would extinct most of life, I think they'd intervene there. It's not our fault, act of God, that kind of thing. But no, they're not here to run this planet, I assure you. I can't imagine any species would want to run this planet.
So they're not here to help either.
They are, again, if in fact we are headed towards disclosure and open contact and the ability to interact with them, you could very well see technology share. We don't have much to share. They got a lot. And the first technologies I would expect would be highly sophisticated genetic tech capable of curing most of the diseases we have. And so when that if that happens, then that will be the real indication that fundamentally they want to help us. They want to help us be part of a larger group. And why not? I mean, we do it all the time. We go to a less developed country and bring in some technology that will help deal with the diseases they're facing. They may well give us that technology. And the process would be disclosure, a couple of years, open contact, and then technology transfer. And so I can make a case that the truth embargo, which is now 72 years old, right, and on its last legs, but clinging, is standing between us and possibly the technology that can cure our diseases, eliminate a massive amount of human suffering, as well as other technologies will solve other huge problems in our biosphere. That's a big deal. But the only reason that 25 million people are not prepared to stand up and say that is because the government has done a pretty good job of keeping them in the dark, keeping them in a paranoid state on this. The truth embargo is no longer acceptable. It was legal under national security, but now it's immoral, and it needs to end. And my job is to end it.
So what is your most important message for people listening to this? What can people do when they hear all of these incredible things about what is going on in the world and beyond?
What's the most important thing they could do is fund the advocacy movement. Provide the organizations and people that are challenging the government with the funds that they need. Because the government's truth embargo has discouraged virtually everyone, except a few, from providing funding. We have an election coming up, and people are going to donate probably $3 to $4 billion to that election to elect somebody. And the government they get will probably be not hardly any better than what they had. But when it comes to this advocacy work, you can't raise the money. If 1 million people put $10 into the advocacy work, including PRG, which has got a contribution page, it's right up there, we could rototill our way through Washington. We could do things you can't imagine. We could have forced disclosure years ago. But the government has gone to great lengths to discourage people from doing that. There's only one thing that the political class wants you to donate to, and that's their campaigns.
If people want to learn more about your work and to see what you are doing or get in contact with you, how can they do so? ParadigmResearchGroup.org. I've got a huge amount of material there, including how to subscribe to my PRG updates free, how to contribute. Also an Indiegogo link to contributions for this podcast, the Disclosure Wire, so we can get higher level tech. There's huge resources there. You could spend weeks on the site. So go there, ParadigmResearchGroup.org. And if you Google my name, hundreds and hundreds of articles will come up. If you Google my name in YouTube, hundreds and hundreds of videos will come up. I don't hide anything. I don't market. By and large, I don't sell. I just inform. And so it's all up there. And I would welcome people to do that. And if somebody in Denmark or Sweden or Norway, which are capitalist countries, by the way, there's capitalism in all of those countries. They're democratic capitalists, really, not democratic socialists. Absolutely.
wants to send a big chunk of money my way, let me tell you, I'll put it to good use.
Well, Stephen Bassett, it's been absolutely fascinating and intriguing to have you on the show, and I want to thank you very much for doing this interview with Age of Truth TV. Thank you so much.
I loved it. You challenged me. I challenged you. This was good stuff. I hope it gets a lot of audience, and let's definitely do it again, not sooner than later.
Absolutely, we would love that. Thank you, Stephen Bassett. Thank you for being here. Take care.
Later.
Thank you very much to Stephen Bassett, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and hit the bell for notifications. On behalf of the entire Age of Truth TV team, we thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.